We moved to Sycamore Ridge in the spring, when the cherry trees along Maple Crest Drive were still in bloom and everything looked like a promise. My husband Daniel and I had spent 11 months searching for the right house, not the biggest or the most beautiful, but the most accessible. We needed wide doorways, a single-level floor plan, a driveway without a steep grade, a neighborhood where the school bus could physically reach our front curb without a driver having to perform engineering miracles. Sycamore Ridge checked every box. The HOA welcome packet even included a section on community inclusivity, which, looking back, might have been the cruelest joke anyone ever printed on cream-colored cardstock. We signed the papers on a Wednesday. By Friday evening, we were unloading boxes while Lily slept in her car seat, her small fingers curled around the stuffed elephant she refused to travel without. We thought we were home. Lily was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy at 14 months old. By the time she was 4, we had learned an entirely different vocabulary, one built from medical terms, insurance codes, equipment catalogs, and the specific language of school district accommodation forms. What we never stopped learning, no matter how many times the world tried to teach us otherwise, was that Lily herself was extraordinary. She was fierce and funny, obsessed with astronomy, capable of making her physical therapist cry with laughter during sessions, and absolutely determined to go to school like everyone else. The school district had assigned her to Pinewood Elementary, which had a full inclusion program, a wonderful resource teacher named Mrs. Aldana, and a specialized school bus equipped with a hydraulic lift. That bus, number 7 on the district's route sheet, became the single most important vehicle in our lives. It arrived each morning at 7:42, and it needed, according to the transportation coordinator, at least a 40-foot clear zone at the designated stop to deploy the lift safely. Our driveway apron, right at the end of our cul-de-sac, was the designated stop. It was perfect, until Deborah Winslow decided it wasn't. He first signed that something was wrong, came 6 weeks after we moved in. I found a folded note in our mailbox, not an envelope. It's just a sheet of paper, folded in thirds, with no return information, informing us that the school bus was creating traffic disruption, and that the HOA encouraged residents to explore alternative drop-off arrangements. I showed it to Daniel, who assumed it was a misunderstanding. We were new. People weren't used to the bus. It would settle down.
I was less
certain. There was something in the phrasing, not the words themselves, but the architecture of them that felt less like a neighbor's concern and more like the opening move in a longer game. I put the note in a folder. I had no idea at that point how full that folder would eventually become. Over the following weeks, Deborah introduced herself properly. She lived 4 houses down in the large colonial with the immaculate hedges. She was the self-appointed moral conscience of Sycamore Ridge. She had served on the HOA board for 6 years, chaired the Aesthetic Standards Committee, and had successfully lobbied to ban basketball hoops visible from the street, wind chimes above a certain decibel level, and holiday decorations before November 1st. She smiled at Lily exactly once the day we met on the sidewalk, and after that, her eyes moved past my daughter as though she were part of the landscaping rather than a person sitting in it. She filed her first formal HOA complaint against us in week 7. The wheelchair ramp we had installed on our front stoop was, according to her filing, non-compliant with the community's architectural standards because the color of the aluminum didn't match the trim on our shutters. The HOA board, to their credit, dismissed it within 48 hours. Deborah was not deterred. She filed again the following week about the placement of Lily's adaptive swing in the backyard being visible from the shared green space and constituting an aesthetic imposition. Dismissed again, and again the week after, about our porch lighting being too bright. By the end of the 2nd month, she had filed 9 complaints. Not one of them had anything to do with actual rules. Every single one of them had everything to do with us. T was a Tuesday in October, a cold morning with that particular gray light that sits between autumn and something more serious. When Deborah Winslow made the decision that changed everything, I know it was a Tuesday because I had packed Lily's backpack the night before with her Tuesday folder, the one that held her weekly, a communication log for Mrs. Aldana, and the permission slip for the upcoming planetarium field trip that Lily had been asking about since September. Lily was thrilled about that trip. She had been telling everyone who would listen that Saturn had 83 confirmed moons, and that she intended to one day name one of them. I had spent a good part of Monday evening listening to her rehearse. This fact for the bus driver, for her aide, and for anyone else who might ride bus number 7 the following morning. We had our routine down to a precise science by then. I would get Lily up at 6:30, help her with her morning routine, have her dressed and fed and in her power chair by 7:15, and we would head down the driveway together. Me, with my coffee, Lily navigating the slight slope with the focused expression she wore when she was operating her chair in challenging conditions, and we would wait at the bottom, where the driveway met the road for the bus that arrived at 7:42, give or take 2 minutes, depending on whether there had been any complications further along the route. It was the most ordinary ritual imaginable. It was also for us a hard one. We had fought for that bus stop designation. We'd worked with the district transportation office for 3 weeks to ensure that the cul-de-sac geometry allowed. For the lift deployment, we had measured, we had photographed, we had submitted paperwork. The stop at our driveway apron existed because we had earned it. That Tuesday morning, Deborah Winslow was standing in the middle of it when we arrived. She had a folding chair. That was the detail that hit me first. Before anything she said, before I fully registered the strategic absurdity of the scene, she had brought a folding chair, the kind you might take to a child's soccer game, and she had set it up squarely in the center of the drop zone, and she was sitting in it with the posture of someone who had thought about this moment and decided she looked righteous in it. She was wearing a vest with the HOA logo embroidered on the breast pocket. I had never seen anyone wear an HOA vest before, and haven't since, and she was holding a clipboard. And she smiled when she saw us coming, the smile of someone who believes they hold every card and wants you to know it. My coffee went cold in my hand. Lily stopped her chair at the edge of the driveway and looked at Deborah and then looked at me with an expression I recognized immediately. She was reading the room the way she always did. The way children who have spent their lives navigating adult systems learn to do with startling accuracy. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything for a moment either. There was a particular kind of silence that belonged entirely to that morning, the hush before something irrevocable begins. And we all three stood in it for the span of several heartbeats while the cold air moved through the cul-de-sac like a third party waiting to see what would happen next. She didn't say anything. Lily didn't say anything. There was only the cold air, a folding chair, and the particular hush that belongs to moments before something irrevocable begins. Deborah spoke first. She told me with the measured delivery of someone reciting from a prepared statement. She had consulted the HOA's traffic management guidelines and determined that the school bus stop constituted a recurring disruption to the residential flow of the cul-de-sac. She said she had filed a formal petition, signed by 3 other residents. She held up the clipboard as though the paper itself were a weapon, requesting that the bus stop be relocated to the main road entrance, approximately a quarter-mile away. She said the HOA board would be reviewing the petition at the following month's meeting, and that, in the interim, she was exercising her right as a board member to flag the location as contested. She said all of this in a voice that was almost entirely neutral, almost entirely bureaucratic. And then she said the thing that I have replayed in my mind every day since. She said, and I am certain of these words because I wrote them down 40 minutes later while my hands were still shaking. I want you to understand that this isn't personal. It's about the character of the neighborhood. Properties near certain kinds of ongoing medical infrastructure see measurable impacts on market value. And the residents of this community have a right to protect their investment. Kids like her, with all their equipment and their specialized vehicles, it changes the feel of a street. I'm sure you understand. Kids like her. I stood there on my own driveway, holding my cold coffee, and I understood 3 things in rapid succession. The first was that Deborah had said the quiet part loud, and that every HOA complaint, every note in the mailbox, every sideways glance at Lily's chair had been building toward this exact sentence. The second was that Lily had heard every word of it, because Lily always heard everything, that I would need to find a way to address that. In the next few minutes, in a manner that didn't shatter whatever sense of safety she still carried about this neighborhood. And the third was that I was done. I was done being patient. I was done filing responses and attending board meetings and speaking in measured tones about accommodation and community standards. I was done trying to make Deborah comfortable with our existence. The bus arrived at 7:43 that morning, 1 minute late, and the driver, a man named Roy, who had been driving Lily's route for 2 years and who called her Stargazer, because of her moon obsession, saw Deborah in the drop zone and stopped the bus short, confused. He rolled down his window and asked if there was a problem. I told him there was not. I told him to pull forward to the marked position. He looked at Deborah. Deborah did not move.
Oh.
Roy looked at me. I walked down the driveway, set my coffee on. The curb took hold of Deborah's folding chair with both hands, moved it and her 18 inches to the left, just enough for the bus to clear the lift zone, and said, in a voice I did not recognize as my own because it was so much quieter, and more certain than any voice I'd used in months, my daughter is getting on her bus now. Deborah stood up from the relocated chair. She said something about legal action. I did not respond. Roy deployed the lift. Lily rolled forward, paused at the edge of the platform, and looked back at me with an expression I will keep for the rest of my life. Not fear, not sadness, but something older and fiercer and entirely her own. And she said, I have 83 moon names ready, Mom. Tell her she can have the last one. Then the lift carried her up. Roy secured her chair. And bus number 7 pulled away from Sycamore Ridge while Deborah stood on the curb beside her relocated folding chair, and I stood on my driveway and watched my daughter disappear around the wall, corner toward everything that was waiting for her. I went inside. I called Daniel, who was already at work. I told him what happened. It was a long silence on his end, the kind that isn't empty but full, and then he said, okay, what do we need? And that was the moment the fight actually started. Not on the driveway with the folding chair, but in our kitchen with the phone pressed against my ear and the full weight of what had been said still settling over me, like something that could either crush you or clarify everything. It clarified everything. By 9 o'clock that morning, I had found the number for the ADA National Network. By 10, I had spoken with a disability rights attorney whose first question, after I described the situation, was whether I had documented the complaints. I told her I had a folder. She asked how thick it was. I told her it was very thick. She said, good. That's exactly what we need. I opened my laptop. I began to type. Out. And somewhere across town, at Pinewood Elementary, my daughter, with 83 moon names and a stuffed elephant, and a power chair that she operated with the focused precision of someone who had never once accepted the limits the world placed in front of her, was telling her aide about the rings of Saturn and counting down the days to the planetarium. The attorney's name was Carmen Reyes, and she had the focused energy of someone who had heard stories like mine before and had never once stopped being angry about them. She explained that what Deborah had done, and more importantly, what she had said, touched on multiple layers of federal protection simultaneously. Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act governs access to public accommodations and transportation systems, and interfering with a disabled child's access to her designated school bus stop, particularly after making statements explicitly. Connecting that interference to the child's disability was not a gray area. It was in Carmen's assessment as clear a case as she had seen. We also had the Fair Housing Act, which prohibits discriminatory interference with a person's peaceful enjoyment of their property based on disability. And the 9 HOA complaints suddenly stopped looking like the petty grievances of a difficult neighbor and started looking like a documented pattern of targeted harassment. Carmen told me to stop attending HOA meetings alone. She told me to start recording every interaction with Deborah Winslow. She told me that the 3 signatures on Deborah's petition were about to become a significant problem for those neighbors. And then she told me something I hadn't expected. We were not the first family in Sycamore Ridge's HOA jurisdiction to experience this. There had been a prior complaint filed 2 years earlier by a family with an autistic child that had been quietly settled. The HOA had institutional memory of exactly this type of behavior and had done nothing structural to prevent its recurrence. That, Carmen said with a particular precision of someone who chooses her words like instruments. was going to matter enormously. We sent the first formal letter to the HOA board within 5 days of the driveway incident. It cited the ADA. It cited the Fair Housing Act. It cited Deborah's verbatim statement. It cited all 9 prior complaints by date, filing number, and stated grounds. And it noted that the pattern, taken as a whole, described a sustained effort to make our family's presence in the community untenable on the basis of our daughter's disability. HOA board president, a mild accountant named Gerald Fitch, who had the look of a man perpetually hoping this sort of thing would resolve itself without his involvement, received the letter on a Wednesday and called me that same evening to say the board was taking it very seriously. I thanked him and said nothing else. 3 days later, Deborah's petition was formally withdrawn. 2 days after that, she resigned from the HOA board citing personal reasons. The folding chair never reappeared in the cul-de-sac. But we were not done. Carmen was not done. Because the point was never only Deborah and her chair. The settlement took 4 months to finalize, and those 4 months were some of the most quietly exhausting of my life. Not because of the legal process itself, which Carmen handled with the kind of systematic, unhurried confidence that I came to rely on completely, but because of everything that ran alongside it. During those months, I still woke Lily up at 6:30 every morning, still helped her with her routine. I still packed her Tuesday folder, still made her oatmeal with the brown sugar on the side the way she liked it, still walked her down the driveway and waited for bus number 7. The legal fight was happening in conference rooms and email chains, in carefully worded letters, but real life was happening on that driveway every single day. And I had to be present for both simultaneously in the way that mothers, particularly mothers of children with complex needs, learn to be present for multiple realities at once. Holding one in each hand without letting either one drop, the HOA board hired their own journey almost immediately after receiving Carmen's letter, which Carmen told me was actually a good sign, and they understood the exposure. It meant that Gerald Fitch had read that letter closely enough to recognize that the folder had spent 3 months assembling was not something they could dismiss with a polite phone call and a promise to look into it. There were 3 rounds of negotiation. In the first, the Hall's attorney suggested that a written policy clarification and a formal apology from the board would constitute adequate resolution. Carmen's response was brief and unambiguous. That was not a settlement. That was a statement. And statements did not create enforceable accountability. In the second round, they offered a financial figure that was, Carmen told me with a carefully neutral expression, not serious. In the third round, which took place over 2 sessions separated by a week, we arrived at something that was the HOA agreed to a comprehensive disability access and anti-discrimination policy, not a 1-page summary, but a full procedural document, 12 pages. That required all board members to complete annual fair housing training conducted by a certified external provider, established a formal review protocol for any complaint that referenced a resident's disability, medical equipment, or accommodation needs, and created a dedicated accessibility officer role within the board structure. With a defined mandate and a reporting requirement, they also agreed to retroactively review all 9 complaints Deborah had filed against us, and enter a formal finding into the HOA's records that each one had been frivolous and discriminatory in nature. That part mattered to me enormously. It was not enough for the complaints to have been dismissed. I wanted it in writing permanently that they should never have been filed. It was not enough for the complaints to have been dismissed. I wanted it in writing permanently that they should never have been filed. They also agreed to a financial settlement, the amount of which remains confidential per the terms of the agreement. What I can say is that Daniel and I sat at our kitchen table the evening after the final documents were signed, and we divided it to 3 portions, with the deliberate care of people who understand that money extracted from injustice carries a particular obligation. The first portion went into a dedicated educational trust for Lily, not for her current schooling, which was handled, but for everything that came after: transition programs, post-secondary options, adaptive technology that would almost certainly need to be upgraded as she grew. All the future doors that we wanted to ensure could never be closed by something as small as a budget shortfall. The second portion went to a disability rights legal aid organization in our county, one that provides free legal counsel to families facing housing and accessibility discrimination who cannot afford private representation. Carmen told us about them early in the process, and I had thought about them often throughout. The families who had a Deborah Winslow on their street and no folder thick enough. No attorney's number, no map through the system. The third portion we kept, and I will not apologize for that. For months of legal battle, while simultaneously raising a child, managing her medical care, and continuing to be a present and stable parent, is labor that costs something, and the cost is real even when it is invisible in the final documents. The three neighbors who had signed Deborah's petition responded to the legal proceedings in three entirely different ways. And the differences told me everything I needed to know about each of them. The first was a woman named Patricia, who lived 2 houses to our left, and who, I later learned, had been pressured into signing by Deborah with the suggestion that the bus stop issue affected everyone's property values and that community solidarity required a unified front. Patricia came to our door on a Saturday morning, unannounced, with a container of homemade soup and an expression of such genuine distress that I'd let her in before she had finished her first sentence. She sat at our kitchen table for 45 minutes. She told me she had a nephew with cerebral palsy. She told me she had signed the petition in a moment of social cowardice that she had regretted almost immediately. She told me she had tried to call the HOA board to withdraw her signature 3 days after signing and had been told, incorrectly and manipulatively, that signatures could not be withdrawn once submitted. She cried. I did not cry, but I came. Close I believed her completely. The second neighbor, a man named Tom, who lived at the far end of the cul-de-sac and who I had exchanged perhaps 6 words with in total, sent a typed letter through his own attorney that was technically an apology. In the same way that a correctly formatted form is technically a document, it said the right words in the right order and communicated nothing human. I kept it in the folder. The third was Deborah's closest ally on the street, a woman named Sandra whose children had grown and moved away, and who had, by several accounts, encouraged Deborah's initial campaign with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for a project. Sandra's letter arrived last, took 3 paragraphs to say very little, and included the phrase, "I'm sorry you felt targeted," which is not an apology but a masterclass in avoiding one. I kept that letter too, at the very back of the folder, as a reminder that some people's understanding has a ceiling they cannot see past. Gerald Fitch, the HOA board president, sent a handwritten note. Not typed, not through an attorney. Not in the formal language of institutional communication, handwritten. On plain notepaper, in the careful script of a man who had thought about what he wanted to say and chosen each word by hand, it said, "I read your attorney's letter 7 times the night it arrived. Each time I read it, I understood more clearly that what happened to your family happened in part because people, like me, see problems forming and choose to hope they resolve themselves. I should have acted sooner. I am sorry." A note I did not put in the folder. I put it somewhere else entirely, in the small wooden box on my desk where I keep the things I want to remember, not for legal reasons, but for human ones. I have read it more times than I can count. I think about Gerald Fitch occasionally and hope he became the board president. The note suggested he had the capacity to be Deborah Winslow's house went on the market in early March. The listing appeared on a Thursday, and by the following Monday, a small sign had joined the larger one. Under contract, she was gone by the middle of April. I know this only because the moving truck was visible from our front window on a Saturday morning while Lily and I were eating breakfast. And Lily looked up from her oatmeal, watched it for a moment, and said with the breezy certainty of a child who has already mentally filed an issue under resolved, "Is that the lady who sat in the road?" I told her yes. Lily considered this, stirred her oatmeal, and said she should have just moved her chair. Then she asked me if I thought Neptune's moons were lonely being so far from the sun, and we spent the rest of breakfast talking about that instead. I did not watch Deborah leave, did not stand at the window. It was nothing I needed to see. In that departure, no closure it could offer that the signed settlement documents and the 12-page policy and the handwritten note from Gerald Fitch had not already provided more completely. What I think about instead, what fills the space that anger used to occupy in those early months, is a morning in late November, 6 weeks after the settlement was signed. It was cold, proper winter cold, the kind that puts a white edge on every breath. Lily had her puffy silver jacket and her galaxy print leggings, and her best friend, Priya, was joining her that morning because Priya's mother and I had arranged a joint school drop-off. Priya stood beside Lily's chair at the end of the driveway, and they were deep in a conversation that I could hear fragments of. Something about whether stars could feel temperature, which is the kind of question that exists only in the minds of 8-year-olds and professional astrophysicists. And the bus came around the corner at exactly 7:42, and Roy leaned out his window and called morning. Stargazer and Lily called back Roy. The official moon count has been updated. I have new information for you, and Roy said he was ready and waiting. The lift deployed without incident. Lily rolled forward, paused at the edge, turned back to wave at Priya and at me with the easy confidence of someone boarding a bus that has always been and will always be exactly where